All right, guys. So this will be our final video for World War One. I know it's coming late in the week. Just kind of turned out that way. So we had talked about in the first video the causes of the war and what a lot of early combat looked like, especially the big focus on trench warfare. That's the main thing that pertains to most all battles. Then we had talked about in the last video what caused the United States to join the war, the three things: the sinking of the Lusitania, the Zimmerman Note, and Germany breaking the Sussex Pledge, or you can just say German U-boat aggression. But things that causes to get the war, and then how the war changes once we join. All right, and one big change is that the United States decides that we want to go on the offensive. All right, our soldiers, the Doughboys, led by John J. Pershing, go on the offensive instead of relying on the trenches. And with the 100 Days Offensive, the United States and other allied nations are able to finally enter into Germany and defeat them. Okay, so how that process of Germany's surrender goes down is starting in September 29th. And there's only one of these dates you need to know. All right, I'm just giving you these for context. Okay, Bulgaria surrendered. All right, so they're the first of the Central Powers to surrender, and probably the least impactful, I would say. But that is going to kind of solidify control of the Balkans for the Allies. All right, so that still does matter. Then a month after that, on October 29th, all right, a revolution happens in Germany. Okay, so socialists overthrow the German government, and they set up a republic in Berlin. This new republic is known as the Weimar Republic. That will be Germany's new government after or all the way up until Adolf Hitler overthrows it and takes over himself. So the Weimar Republic, like I said, socialist, something that Otto von Bismarck, the guy who kind of helped create Germany, did not want to happen. He's very anti-socialist. I can't remember if we were in class when we did it or this actually. There's a great article talking about how he gave Germany free health care to make the socialists happy in the hopes to keep them from trying to bring in more socialism. It's kind of ironic but interesting article there. But regardless, okay, now Germany is a socialist nation. And the Kaiser, all right, is going to be forced to abdicate. So Germany's king, Wilhelm II, has to give up the throne. All right, he does survive the war. All right, but he has to go. It's in one of the Baltic nations, I think. Um, Sweden or Denmark is one of those that he goes and lives the rest of his life out in exile. He actually is around while Hitler first rises to power. They did have a little bit of a back and forth conversations when that goes on. But so Germany now no longer has a Kaiser. They are a republic with a president and a chancellor. A day after the German Revolution goes down, the Ottoman Empire surrenders. Okay, October 30th, day before Halloween. And we mentioned that at the Battle of Megiddo, once they're defeated by the Egyptian forces. So now the Balkans are secured, as is the Middle East and Northern Africa. Then a few days later, November 3rd, okay, Italy leads to Austria-Hungary surrender. So the Italians defeat them there. Austria and Italy had always been a big rivalry, which we kind of touched on periodically through the year. So on November 3rd, Austria-Hungary is out of the war. That same day, German soldiers were told to go out on a mission to go kind of face the British Navy in one kind of last desperate hopes to gain some kind of positive momentum. Now, the soldiers knew that this was a suicide mission. Their army was already weak. They knew the war was kind of a lost cause at this point. And they knew that that would be like a suicide mission to do that. So instead of going out and most likely dying and destroying what was left of the German Navy, the sailors mutiny. Now, this would have meant their death, all right, being executed after being court-martialed, but the entire German Navy that was told to go out stops the engines of their ships, all right, refuses to go out to sea, stages this mutiny. And with that, it's pretty clear when your own soldiers are refusing to fight for you, you really don't have any of a chance. And about a week after that, okay, so on Germany's going to call for an armistice. So November 11th, okay, now it happens, all right, and this is a good way to remember it. This is one day you need to know. On the 11th hour, okay, 11 a.m., on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, okay, so November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m., Germany calls for an armistice. Now, this day, all right, might not stand out to you, but it actually affects all of us. Every November 11th, we are out of school, okay, and that is because that is the day that we celebrate Veterans Day. It used to be known as Armistice Day, okay, and armistice is not a surrender, it's a call to stop fighting. But but that is the day that World War I officially came to an end. Okay, so that is why we celebrate Veterans Day on the day that we do. Okay, to signify that and to fighting. So the Great War is now over. Okay, Europe is supposed to be at peace, but yet this war has had a devastating impact on the continent. Okay, so there's a chart in there that shows the final toll. Okay, how many soldiers were casualties for each side, each nation. A casualty is not just those who were killed, but also severely wounded, missing in action, prisoners of war. All right. For the Allied, the winning side, okay, 22 million casualties. That is over half of all soldiers who fought for the Allied nations were a casualty, with France and Russia getting the worst of it. In fact, Russia led all Allied nations with 1.7 million soldiers killed. Okay, then almost another 5 million were wounded. France gave up both of them about 3/4 of all their soldiers became a casualty. Okay, if you're a casualty, you do not leave that war coming out just fine. Okay, you're changed in some fashion. For the Central Powers, all right, they had fewer casualties because they had fewer soldiers, but 67% of them, y'all, 2/3. Okay, if you have someone on the left of you and someone on the right, only one of you is coming out of that war fine. The other rest of y'all are either getting killed, wounded, POW. Mention that. Okay. Germany had the most deaths just due to having the most soldiers. But for Austria-Hungary, it was probably the most severe. Okay, 90% of all Austro-Hungarians who fought in the war, 1.2 million, okay, were a casualty. Okay, 1 out of 10 made it through this just fine. The United States, okay, we're on that list. Only 7.1%. Two reasons why. One, we joined the war. Okay, we're full of energy and excited, geared up, ready to go, while everybody else is already so worn out. And then two, okay, because at that's when the shift from trench warfare fighting, just kind of trying to bleed out the other army, to more open field, quick attack. Okay, it made you more vulnerable, but it got battles over quicker, and you didn't end up with the same amount of lives lost. Okay, so that is the impact, all right, of loss of life and kind of people who are ruined from the war. There's also a chart on there showing the economic impact of the war. And outside of the United Kingdom and the United States, all right, this war is going to tank the economies of the European nations, especially France and Germany. Okay, their economies fall over a third, almost a quarter of their entire economy collapses because of the war. All right, but yet the United States and the United Kingdom, Great Britain, we actually prosper because of World War One. Okay, because we were the two, other than Germany, had probably the two largest industrial bases, and we're churning out supplies and all this stuff for the soldiers. So that's factories working, Americans working, jobs, money coming into America to buy that from other countries. Um, so that's why those two nations prosper. Had Germany not been where most of the fighting took place in the center of Europe, they probably would have prospered economically as well. So, but fighting's over. Now we got to figure out how to come to peace. Okay. So the four nations, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Ottoman Empire, all had their own separate peace agreements with the Allies. They each negotiated their own separate deals. Austria-Hungary has two separate ones. But the one with Germany is what is most famous. Okay, so it's the Versailles Peace Agreement. Okay, this is what our Treaty of Versailles activity is based on. This, so it takes place at the Palace of Versailles in France that we talked about with the Louis building that up, starting with I believe it was the 13th, but really big jumps with Louis the 14th. So that grand fancy palace is where the peace talks take. Now, in the discussion, Germany is not even considered whatsoever. They fully expect to be invited. Okay, and there's two reasons why Germany thought that they had a right to be involved in the peace talks. One, they had already made peace with Russia. They set that precedent that when Russia dropped out, they would make peace with them. So therefore, they should be able to keep what Russia was forced to give them and show that they were willing to work with other people. But two, all right, the surrender. It's not actually surrender. It was an armistice, okay? Kind of like a truce. All right, you know, when you're kind of roughhouse with your friends and kind of gets to a point where it's a little too rough. All right, truce before we break my mom's vase, okay? So they'd called for an armistice, a stop to fighting, not an actual surrender. So in Germany's mind, they did not really lose the war, okay? So they fully expect to be involved in the peace talks and are stunned and really embarrassed when they're left out. Instead, though, it's going to be the Allied nations with kind of the United States, Great Britain, France, and Italy running the show. Okay, so they're known as the Big Four, the leaders of those nations. For Italy, Victoria Orlando; France, their prime minister, or no, France had a president, George Clemenceau; Great Britain's prime minister, David Lloyd George; and then the United States, okay, President Woodrow Wilson. Now, I think Woodrow Wilson's incredibly overrated. I'm not a Woodrow Wilson fan for a couple reasons, but one big one is because of I think he screws up big time at Versailles. So Wilson, the United States, we have a Secretary of State. It's their job to go and negotiate these kind of treaties. Wilson decides to personally go in and negotiate these peace agreements himself, something that presidents just did not do. He also, okay, took only members of his party to the negotiation. All right, he's a Democrat. No Republicans whatsoever were considered in the peace talks. All right, they didn't ask what they want for the nation, what they think was right. So when he does get back to America, the Republicans are livid and do not want to accept any of his peace agreements, and that's his fault for kind of leaving them out. He kind of made it a Democratic issue, not a United States issue. Well, there are kind of two dividing thoughts here, okay? But Clemenceau and George both want to bring Germany down a notch, okay? They knew back at that concert of Europe, you had a balance of power. When there was Prussia, a unified Germany would upset that, and we saw that play out. Now, Great Britain doesn't want to just outright punish them, okay? They see a chance to profit off of Germany in the treaty, whereas France, they do want to punish them. They see another potential war. They see Germany getting upset and trying to reinvade them again. A lot of people forget about the Franco-Prussian War, and that was pretty recent in their memory, just a few decades prior. So France is very, very afraid of Germany coming back, and they really want to bring them down. But despite what the country's different goals, all right, the highlight is going to be what Woodrow Wilson's contribution to it is. Okay, so he makes this proposal known as the 14 points. The 14 points is his plan to bring everlasting peace to Europe and to kind of help deal with the outcome of the war. Now, it's very idealistic, okay, and on paper, it all sounds like it should be right, okay. Now, Wilson, it's not surprising he'd come up with this. He was a political scientist. He taught that as a professor in college. He was president of Princeton, so he's an academic, okay? He knows on paper, he's what you refer to as one of the experts. He should know the right way to go about this. However, his altruism kind of comes up to catch him because he really doesn't take into effect kind of how people are, okay? Even though, yeah, the data says it's the right way, this is really, though, how people are going to react. So his plan, his 14 points can be broken down into 3 different categories, okay? So points 1 through 5 deal with steps to prevent another war. How do we keep something from happening again? One of those is no secret treaties, all right? Like the treaties and alliances that nations had prior to World War I, that, hey, I might go in and invade Serbia because they caused us some problems, not knowing that Russia's going to come in and back them up and bring in other countries. Another was freedom of the seas. Okay, this is one of the things that brought the United States into the war was the German U-boat usage. So just claiming that the sea should not be a place of conflict, that any nation, any boat, whatever, should be safe to go to and sail through any part of water. And then the third kind of topic in there deals with the M of the main reasons that leads to the war, minimizing the military. Okay, nations were too eager to go and fight because of how large their armies were and how much they invested in them. So they decided, maybe if we cut down the size of everyone's armies, especially Germany's, maybe the threat of warfare might not be as likely. Okay, if we don't have a large enough army, we're not as encouraged to go and use it, so we might want to stay back. Okay, ironic because army sizes have now beyond surpassed what it was then. All right, then points 6 through 13, kind of the second topic, deals with boundary changes. Okay, so to punish some of the losing nations and to deal with this nationalist issue that's going on through Europe, all right, they decide to reorganize some of the countries. Okay, they're going to change up their borders, create new countries, divide up others, take away land from some. And the goal was to do this along historically established lines of nationality. So here is, like I said, Wilson's academia coming in. Okay, great idea. All right, this ethnic group, the Slavs, have always been here. Maybe they should get control of their own nation. We'll call it Yugoslavia. Hey, Romanians, okay, even though this is Romania, there are ethnic Romanians that make up large parts of this part of the world here. Let's expand Romania's border, okay? Things like that. But it's a great idea, except the problem, especially in the Balkans, you still got other groups mixed in some of these areas that might be majority that will resent that, that likes their connection to another country, or the fact that they punish the losing side, okay, and reward the winning side. They take away too much land probably from some of those sides, and that's what you do in war. Um, but they might not have stayed quite true to those historically established lines. And then the third category, all right, point number 14, and this is the most important, all right, contribution from Wilson's 14 points. Creation of a League of Nations, all right. So the League of Nations was going to be a peacekeeping organization. All countries would join together and they would send representatives there to meet and discuss what's going on in the world and try to negotiate with each other, find a solution to each problem to prevent it from going to war. Okay, that way they can kind of talk it all out. That sounds familiar to you, that it should be, because we have a system very similar to that now with the United Nations. Okay, now there's a reason why we have the United Nations and not the League of Nations, and we'll talk about that some with how the United States screws up the Treaty of Versailles. So there's a plan, though, to have a worldwide peacekeeping organization similar to what we talked about with the continent of Europe, all right, but more expansive and more involved. But we still don't get it right with the League of Nations. One reason why we don't get it right is because I mentioned how Wilson left the Republicans out to dry with the treaty talks. So the Republicans in Congress refused to ratify the treaty. Just because a president signs something doesn't mean we've joined in our nation. The Senate still has to ratify any and all treaties. The Senate, Republican majority, refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. So the United States actually does not sign the treaty. Okay, we do not agree to those terms. It's not until 1921 that we make our own separate treaty with Germany. All right, so technically we're still at war with them for a few years after. But the United States does not sign the Treaty of Versailles. And most importantly, we do not join the League of Nations. Okay, it's like you come up with this great idea for a cool club, get all your friends to join, get the school to approve it, and then you don't join it. All right, that's what the whole thing with the Treaty of Versailles was like for the U.S. And that matters, okay, not just because of the reputation of, oh, well, the United States came up with it and it doesn't even join, but the United States is kind of the strongest country after World War I. We weren't hurting like everyone else said. We weren't in it for those crucial first 3 or so years. We didn't suffer the large losses. Our economy was prospering. If the League of Nations was going to be considered legitimate or appear to have the authority to stand up to other nations and stop them, the United States needed to be involved. We needed to be a member. But because, like I said, Congress doesn't ratify, the Senate doesn't ratify it, but you also had a large chunk of the United Nations who didn't want to get involved in the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, you had the America First Committee, things like that. Charles Lindbergh was a big voice against that. A lot of people in the United States were very, very outspoken against the United States joining World War I from the get-go, and so they really didn't want us getting involved in European affairs. Okay, isolationism becomes kind of the big foreign policy strategy in the years after World War I to stay out of Europe's problems. But everybody else, though, does agree to the treaty, and Germany really has no choice but to agree to it, even though Germany did not believe they lost the war, so the German people especially are very resentful of what this treaty means and what they have to agree to. So what happens to Germany? They get no profit and they gain no territory. Okay, which if you lost a war makes sense, but they didn't. They lost. Instead, Germany has to agree to what is known as the War Guilt Clause. Okay, which is essentially placing all the blame for starting World War I on Germany. Now, if you remember back to the first video, it was the assassination of the Archduke of Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary that started the war. An assassination done by one guy from a terrorist organization that was not sponsored by his own country and was killing the leader of a country that's not Germany. It's about a month later before Germany gets involved in this. Now, yes, Germany is at fault because they do help escalate the war. Them enacting the Schlieffen Plan causes Great Britain to get involved when they invade Belgium. but they really don't start World War I. Okay, the problem should lie with Serbia and or Austria-Hungary. Serbia was on the winning side though, so they're not going to partake in that. So Germany's forced to be blamed for starting the war. Okay, which is a big blow to the German nationalist pride. Next up, they're going to be forced to pay reparations equaling $33 billion. Okay, now $33 billion is a ton of money. Okay, and reparations means they have to pay for the damages of the war. They got to pay the winning countries, Germany, Great Britain, France and Great Britain, all that stuff. Those nations, they got to pay them for damages from the war. All right. Well, let's put in $33 billion. Okay, so that'd be 1,000, million, and a billion. Sorry, I'm doing this on my computer. All right. $33 billion then today would add up to over $492 billion. Germany, whose economy tanks because of the war, okay, its own industrial base and farm agricultural base, all that is suffering because of damage from the war. Its population, especially its working population, all right, adult and teenage men, is severely lacking because a lot of them get killed or wounded in the war. So Germany is really not even where it can fix its own damages from the war. But now they've got to find a way to pay what today would be $492 billion. Okay, half a trillion, all right, in damages for the war, for other countries. Not just fixing your own stuff, fixing other people's stuff. Okay, so this is going to wreck the German economy, and when the Great Depression happens, it's going to make it even worse over there in Germany. This really does huge damage to them and makes it where it's hard for them to kind of recover from that. And also, all right, the kind of the feeling of Germany and the suffering makes it understandable why the German people might have been willing to cling to or accept a leader who said they could fix everything, like Adolf Hitler. Also to show you the kind of how extensive that was, it wasn't until 2010, and I had to go double check, make sure that's the right year. But 2010 that Germany finally finished paying off its war debt to the Allies. Almost 100 years later. The people making the final payments, them and most of their parents were not even alive when the war went down. All right. So, this, like I said, Germany does not recover from this for almost a century. And then the third thing that happens to Germany is they are going to be banned from maintaining an army. Okay. They are forced to demilitarize on a large scale. Essentially, all they have is a glorified police force. If someone wanted to go in and invade Germany, they really wouldn't have a true way to protect themselves. Once again, another knock to that German national pride. Now, people weren't supposed to invade them because of the League of Nations, but they felt vulnerable. They're also told that there's a chunk of your country called, when we talked about the Rhineland, okay, with Napoleon, the Confederation, okay, that area between France and Germany that was part of Germany's land was supposed to be a demilitarized zone. No soldiers, no troops, none of that was supposed to be over there, okay, meant to keep France extra safe, kind of keep that cushion between the two countries. So I said, Germany gets just screwed over completely as a result of this. Yes, they deserve a good bit of blame. They should be punished somewhat, in my opinion, but not to the not to the level that they do. All right, so that's the highlight of what happens from the Treaty of Versailles. A couple of other changes, as we mentioned, with the boundary changes on historically established lines of nationality. So a couple of new countries are created. All right, Poland, which was that land that Russia gave to Germany, as well as some of Germany's eastern lands, south of where Prussia originally was. Okay, Poland used to exist, okay, and then it got absorbed by Russia and Germany. They're going to be brought back as a nation. Okay, there are ethnic Polish people, and of course, World War II starts when Hitler invades Poland, who the Allies were bound by the Treaty of Versailles to protect. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania also get created as lands that used to belong to Russia that were given to Germany and the Allies. Czechoslovakia gets taken away from Austria-Hungary and is its new country. There are a couple of others, new ones that spot up. The Ottoman Empire loses territory. Austria-Hungary gets broken up into two halves, and now it's no longer Austria-Hungary. They are two separate nations of Austria and a nation of Hungary. meant to make them weaker. Pretty much all the Balkans gets completely reorganized. Yugoslavia is a new country. That's Serbia, who expands and takes over some of Austria's lands. So the whole map of Europe gets redrawn completely. All right, France is also going to gain some land from Germany on top of having the Rhineland as a buffer zone. They regain Alsace-Lorraine, which, if you remember, we mentioned they lost that once they lost the Franco-Prussian War, and that was kind of used to help unify Germany. And then the League of Nations is created. So this is what the peace for World War I does. Okay, this is what the treaty does. That article that hopefully you read this week goes a lot more in depth on some of the particulars of that, but also why it matters. That's really it for World War I. Next week we'll have a few more videos to watch, more to do in your packet, especially with the rise of dictators and Hitler, some stuff that I think you guys will be excited about. Also, like I said, this stuff pertains to the Treaty of Versailles activity for those who want to do it. That's all I got, though. Like I said, reach out if you've got questions, but y'all take care.